So here we are with Jewish Astrology, a Cosmic Science, written by Rabbi Yaakov KRONENBERG. Let's come back to where we were before and start this shir by reading this section. Let me bring this up a little bit so we don't have to get so cramped. So, he writes, the next point I would like to talk about is how astrology originated. The accepted wisdom is that astrology started about 2,000 years before the Common Era. That's about 4,000 years ago, which today is Iraq, Mesopotamia. It was about the time of Avram Avinu. In that area, and Abraham also lived in that area. How it has started and developed is very hazy. The way it started, very hazy, and there is no adequate explanation for how the images of the zodiac came to be, and the other star clusters. Now, there's an app for the cell phone called Skyview. If you get the updated version, it shows you a myriad of constellations. I mean, they're just over and over and over again. Basically, the astrology is based on 12 of these constellations, and if you look at the number of stars that are around and how they draw the constellation together, it's really a mystery how they managed to do this. But maybe they saw something and they knew something that we can't see today. How did all the people all over who connected the stars to form images? And that's the whole thing. How do you connect them? If there was no logical reason for these images, how did a consensus come about? And they were accepted in Iraq and then spread throughout the whole world with no disagreement. That's interesting. If there is no logical reason for something, why should everyone accept it? Even when there are logical reasons for something, nations and peoples disagree, and here something was universally accepted for no apparent reason. So, in other words, it's not logical that everybody would agree on these 12 constellations. So again, it's a very ancient question. I was always bothered by this, how did it happen that the whole world accepted it? That if you look at the stars at night, you look at the picture books of the constellation, how they look, and you ask yourself how everyone in the world agreed, made the same connection between the stars and formed the same picture. Now there are billions of stars. So the question is how did they draw those lines and make those constellations? It does not make any sense to me at all. It was always something that bothered me very much. Why do all the nations agree? And it's a big question for astrologers. How did it spread out? How did it go from there to one place? How could you, because remember again, in those days, at nighttime, you saw the whole sky, if it wasn't cloudy. You saw the whole sky, you saw everything, all the millions of stars. There were other things that spread throughout the world and were universally accepted for no apparent reason. In other words, why do all the nations use a counting system based on 10? Wherever you go, there's a counting system where everybody counts to 9, and then you start over. Wherever you go, there is a counting system where everybody counts to 9, and then you start over. Why? Well, we will talk about that someday because 10 spheros is the concept of 10. There are 10 channels. The world was made on 10. And why do all the nations accept the 7 days of the week? That's another one. How come every nation in the world has 7-day weeks? Maybe there is something in the world that doesn't. Maybe you could find a place somewhere. But as far as I know, just about anywhere you go in the world, there are going to have 7-day weeks. And again, that is also from the Bible. Where do you get the idea of 7-day weeks? It's from the Jewish Bible. And then if you accept that 7-day weeks come from the Jewish Bible, then you have to accept the whole planetary hour system comes from the Jewish Bible. All of a sudden, you have a 7-day week. And each day is ruled by a different planet, and each hour of the day is ruled by a different planet, and you see it all based on the idea of 7. And so you have to ask yourself, why is it created with 7? What's the big deal about 7? So we have 7 and 10. And also, you know, in the Bible, the world was created with the 10 statements of God, the 10 commandments. Why do we have the number 10 counting till 10? It also comes from the Bible. God said, let there be light. And God said, let there be this. And he said, 10 utterances and the world was created. Now that's according to Jewish tradition. That's also a metaphor. It's not so easy to see how God made these utterances, but that's how he did it. So we have a count consisting of 10. And we have 7 days of the week. So you see that all of this is found in the Bible. And you see that really everything comes in the Bible. And I want to say that really the Jewish rabbis would never have accepted. You have to understand that the Jewish rabbis would never have accepted astrology. In other words, we're a very skeptical group. We investigate. That's what we do. We seek God in everything, so we seek the truth. And I want to say that the really rabbis would never have accepted. You have to understand that the Jewish rabbis would never have accepted astrology. In Jewish astrology is believed, in other words, there's an idea in Jewish religious law that astrology works. Maybe there are arguments over whether you can practice it, or what the Jewish approach is to practicing astrology, or to following astrologers' advice. But the Jewish approach to astrology is in the Jewish law book. The Jews have a Jewish law book called the Shulchan Aruch. They have a law book that they follow, and in that law book says that astrology works. So nobody talks about this, except Rabbi Yaakov and some others, but generally they work on the law books. And they would never have accepted astrology if it was developed by the people of Babylon. In other words, if it was Gentile. Some people who just sat around, some tribal people who sat around campfires and drank beer, they connected the lines of the stars and they drew the constellations. You know, they made it up. The rabbis are not like that. They would not have accepted something man-made. They just don't do that. It's not accepted if it can't be proved. So in other words, it has to have some connection to the Almighty. So in any case, there are sources that show that really astrology, to answer all these questions, what you really have to say is that certain wisdoms, certain things were started with the very first man, Adam HaRishon. There was one man created, and he was given secret knowledge. He understood what was going on in the stars. And to answer these questions, you really have to come to an idea like this, that really the laws of astrology began with Adam HaRishon, the very first man, because he understood the movement of the world and the movement of the planets around it, and where he stood. It says like this: an angel of God taught Adam HaRishon, the first man, astrology. Then he passed it on to his sons, and they passed it on until it reached the Tower of Babel, Tower of Babel, what we call the story of the Tower of Babel, which was somewhere in Mesopotamia called Iraq. I guess in that area in Mesopotamia region. And that was where Abraham also had his place before he came to Israel. So this is where the Jewish people also come from originally. And that became the hotbed of astrology. At that time, the whole civilized world was there. And then, when the world got dispersed, at the time of the Tower of Babel, everyone got spread out. Everyone got different languages, and they spread out to different areas of the world. And that is how astrology became spread. But it was spread from this original teaching that was given over to Adam HaRishon. It was given over to Adam HaRishon, the first man, and then he passed it on, and it went on down the line. And when the dispersion came, people took it to all different places of the world. In other words, it was a condensed idea that came from the very beginning of reality, but the people began to rebel against God, causing dispersal. And this dispersal, therefore, dispersed this knowledge. And it got spread out. And we see, for example, in India, the Brahmins. Now, there's a Brahmin class. The Brahmins, some people say a lot of it was from Abraham. Some people say that the word Brahmin is really would take the A from Abraham and put it in front of the word Brahman, and you have Abrams. Abraham was a Brahmin, say the Brahmins. They came from Abraham. So these are the people who are the priestly class of the Indians. It says in the Torah that Abraham had a concubine that he sent to the east with gifts. And the Torah, they say, had a major commentary on the Torah at that time. He says, and the Torah, so he said, what kind of gifts would Abraham send? He's not going to send diamonds and beautiful clothing. He was a great spiritual master. So he sent them over with special names and a lot of special things that he sent over to India. And I think a lot of their teachings are built on that. That is for another class. But in any case, what I'm saying is, I came on this idea a lot on my own over the years that lately I've been seeing it in a lot of different places. There's a Jewish book called philosophy called the Kuzari. And the Kuzari talks like this, that there was secret knowledge that was given over to the very first man, Adam. And just now I was talking to a great astronomer, a professor of astronomy, I think that's kind of blotted out. And he told me the idea is found in a book by a Jewish historian for the time of the Roman period. You'll go back 2,000 years. Let me see if I find this lined up better. So let me read it again. He told me that my idea is found in a book by a Jewish historian for the time of the Roman period that's called In Rome, and wrote a book on history of the world back then. His name was Flavius Josephus. And he called his book History of the World. And there he said, Adam Rishon had a son, and he passed that on until he reached Noah. So all of the knowledge of the secrets that he had, he gave to his son, whose name was Shes, or Shet, depending on your accent, at the time of the flood, and Noah passed it on to his son Shem, and Shem was the original astrologer. He taught everyone astrology. And you see it came from the sources where it shows not just me. There are sources from history, the Kuzari, Flavius Joseph. The Kuzari was written by Rabbi Yehuda Levi. It's a very interesting book, and there are good English translations of it again today. It's eminently readable. Also, Josephus, there are translations in English. You shouldn't have any problem getting it. And they talk about this idea that there were certain secret wisdoms that were given over to Adam Rishon, the first man. And they said that that one of them was the planets, astrology, the constellations. And because of this, Jewish rabbis accepted astrology. Not because, God forbid, they would never accept it from a teaching that was started by some Neanderthal men sitting drinking in a cave by a campfire and watching the sky and writing down what they saw. No, they would never have accepted that. That's for sure. So anyway, that was his lecture, and I think that if you look back on it, now I didn't really get his part where he was going to say about, I think it was left out really, where he was going to talk about the difference between the psychological type of analysis and the analysis of prediction. I didn't see really we got into that here. But instead what he got into was telling you the difference between the astrology, which is the Vedic astrology, which really believes that the planets themselves are powers within themselves and that you need to pray to them, etc., in order to get things to work out. They did track very well. They tracked very well the movements of the planets. So he wants to say, to close, I remember my first teacher of astrology, the great teacher, the godfather of all traditional astrology of today. That's a very strong statement. I think almost all people who went off into traditional astrology at one point or another, his students. His name was Mr. Zoltan Mason. He once told me that all of astrology is hidden in the Bible. Only the person needs for his eyes to be open to see it. In other words, all of astrology is hidden in the Bible if you can find it. Now later on, the famous rabbi, the Gaon of Vilna, is really he's the top a great genius who lived in Lithuania in the 1700s, actually more like 1800, the year 1800, said that all of science, all of mathematics, is also hidden in the Bible. But the pathways to be able to find that have gotten lost. And the tradition of how to find it also got lost. So the Gaon of Vilna brought back a lot of it, but a lot of it got lost. Unfortunately, with God's help, maybe it'll all come back together. This is Baruch Fleischman. This has been a little series from Reb Yaakov KRONENBERG. This series, let's get back to the beginning, was because philosophy and the history of Jewish astrology. This is Baruch Fleischman. You're listening to the Tikkun Elevator Kollel. Thank you for listening.